Welcome to A Gay and a Non-Gay. I'm James Barr. I am homosexual.
Yes.
And that's Dan, and he is a non-homosexual.
Yes.
But it's not his fault.
This is A Gay and a Non-Gay. We have a guest joining us today, Richard Angell, OBE. He's the Chief Executive of the Terrence Higgins Trust, which, if you are not in the UK, is the UK charity whose work is at the forefront of the fight against HIV and improving the sexual health of people in the UK.
I mean, it's actually amazing that that's your job title, because I feel like I've known you quite a long time, struggling to place where, but incredible that you're now the chief executive of this big charity that had a huge impact on my life just growing up.
Well, we've been doing lots of LGBT advocacy for a long time, James, and it's very kind for you to let me come and join your wonderful show and what you do as a listener, as well as a kind of supporter of the stuff you both create. But it's been a really interesting journey for me, and when I joined Terrence Higgins Trust 5 or so years ago, I thought I knew about HIV as a gay man, and it was amazing how much I didn't know, but crucially how much injustice there still was associated with HIV and how much the stigma from the 80s had lingered. So when I joined on my second day, I was told you couldn't join the military if you were living with HIV. Those rules are thankfully now gone. I learned there was a restriction on driving with AIDS. Nobody even knew what that meant.
What's the restriction on
but
that?
It's gone now, thankfully, because
Right.
of Terrence Higgins Trust. Like, if you were not in a straight marriage, you couldn't donate egg and sperm if you were living with HIV. We've now got those rules changed, and that lots of the other rules, which weren't about the virus but were about the stigma associated with the virus, were still in existence. So you couldn't donate blood if you're a man who'd had sex with men, or if you'd ever had sex in Africa, whatever. Again, these things that kind of, these lingering things from the 80s. All those rules are gone because of the Terrence Higgins Trust and some of our partners. And of course, HIV can affect anyone, but it has so disproportionately affected the gays.
TM.
And but it's definitely something that affects the non-gays as well. And,
more so lately, I think. I mean, we're going to get into all of this today. The charity is obviously named after Terry Higgins, who was one of the first named people in the UK to die of an AIDS-related illness. It would have been Terry's 80th birthday, which is actually quite heartbreaking because that's not that old. I mean, 80 is of age, but Terry should be alive.
Well, he was 37 in 1982 when he died. He was dating a 19-year-old, a wonderful man called Rupert Whittaker, who's still with us today. Their relationship was illegal. The age of consent was 21 at the time. And together they were going through a diagnosis of HIV, not knowing the virus, which didn't even have a name at that point. And Terry, of course, who worked in Hansard in Parliament by day, recording what our Parliament should say, and then worked in Heaven nightclub in the evenings, collapsed there one night when he was DJing and was sent to St Thomas's Hospital. He admitted himself once, but then he came back just a few weeks later and never to leave again. And Rupert had to watch his partner die and plead with the doctors to ask, what was this virus? Was it the mystery virus from America that so many gay men were reading about and fearing? And of course, because of their relationship at the time and where society was, they didn't recognise their relationship. So he was dismissed as a friend most, but not an next of kin or anyone of any significance. And he was told he'd had to read about how Terry died in a medical journal. I mean, how callous and uncaring is that to say this person that you are clearly in love with and have travelled back from Durham to watch die in front of you, you're saying, your views don't matter, your relationship doesn't matter, read about it in a medical journal. That's why we're marking his would-be 80th birthday with our Do It for Terry campaign.
And he's a really interesting guy, right? I mean, busy, clearly, for a start, but he's working in Parliament in the daytime, he's DJing at night and working behind the bar. He's written a book on astrology.
I think he was clearly a wild guy, but also a really caring and compassionate guy. So he was born and brought up in West Wales, born in 1945. And he lived with his single mum, and they had a really extended family. And clearly in Haverfordwest, it was a close-knit community, and it was really important, and everyone knew everybody. And as he became a late teenager, he decided he wanted to leave the area, and he joined the Navy. So he served our country, travelling the world. And while he'd done his time in the Navy, and we're in the kind of 60s now, the height of the Cold War, he decides to tell his superiors that he's one of those gays, and it's time that they kicked him out the Navy so he could go back to London and enjoy his gay life, I imagine, in London. And his superior said to him, I'll go back and do some work. If we kicked all the puffs out, we wouldn't have a navy left. So he had to go back to doing his work. And he and a friend...
Have you not heard the Village People song?
Yeah.
In the Navy.
And he went back and found some red paint and painted a hammer and sickle on the side of the warship. And that got him kicked out of the Navy. Why did he do that?
Oh,
because it got him kicked out of the Navy.
Well, hammer and sickle, is that
It
Russian?
was at the height of the Cold War. That was the symbol of the Communist Party and Soviet Russia.
It's funny because, I mean, I'm not really seeing much difference between me and Terry in this chat. Like, grew up with a single mum, DJ'd at Heaven when he was 37. I mean, I think I was there. I don't know if I was 37, but I was definitely DJing at Heaven.
Don't know if you worked in Parliament, though.
I didn't, but I do think stand-up and, like, you know, entertainment is a similar job.
Yeah.
But that's crazy. And I guess that leads me to my question. Do you think young people today have any awareness of any of all of this?
Well, clearly not enough. And that's partly why we continue to do our work, is to share the stories, not just of the journey that the HIV epidemic has been on, but what particularly the queer community went through to get there. Now, things have moved on. The virus has a name, it has a test, it has care, it has treatment that became available. And that kind of Lazarus effect in the 90s was so different. And people now live with HIV. And so it's not a virus to be feared in the same way, but it is one to be avoided. And getting that message nuanced across to younger people is really key. And we've seen numbers year on year broadly go down. The proportion that are straight is kind of going up in comparison to that, because we're making such progress amongst gay men, but that progress is less amongst younger queer people and amongst queer people of colour, and that's where we
and presumably with younger queer people, it's because you just don't know about it. Like, people don't talk about it. I was thinking before this interview, I was like, you're probably going to judge me massively and people will come for me in the comments, but I can't remember the last time I used a condom. I literally cannot remember the last time.
But if you're on PrEP, that is as effective, and it means that you can't acquire HIV. So that's a really effective tool. So you're taking charge of your sexual health, whether you're using condoms or not. And if the person you're having sex with knows they're living with HIV, is taking their medication, they won't be able to pass it on when you're having sex. So the safest person you have sex with, somebody who knows their status and is taking their meds, or somebody who's taken charge of their sexual health and takes this new med, PrEP, which is the drug you take before having sex, to mean if you ever come into contact with a virus, you don't get it.
Yeah, and thank you for all of that. That was exceptionally put.
Yeah.
And shuts down my internalized shame. But I guess my point was, I remember when I was 18, and it would be insane. If you didn't wear a condom, you would tell a friend, you'd be crying, they'd be crying with you, everyone would be freaking out. You'd go for a very long wait to find out whether you had contracted HIV and might die. And obviously even then, it wasn't quite as bad as that, but it felt like that. And I think now that's just gone.
I remember going to a sexual health clinic when I was 17. I had been trying to use a condom, but it had broken. I had convinced myself that this was going to be the end of days. And I sat in that clinic, I gave a false name, I waited, I sweated. We finally had the appointment, but in those days you had to wait 4 days to get the result. Now it's 15 minutes that you can get the result, but it was 4 days then. When they told me it was gonorrhea, I was so elated. It was like the best news they'd ever shared. And so things have changed, thankfully, from that time.
Obviously that's incredible, but is that why we've lost some of that awareness, and how do we bring that back?
Well, I think we want people to know about it because they're empowered about their sexual health rather than scared about the consequences of sex. When people are scared of sex or trying to deny the sex they want to have, it has all kinds of terrible consequences, and it comes up in poor mental health elsewhere, and people turning to having unsafe sex, and often sex that they maybe lose control about whether they're having. So we want to try and move away from that sense that this is a virus you should fear, but one that you can overcome, basically.
How do you feel about Terry now, and how Terry would feel about the world?
I think it's fair to say Terry's more radical than I was. So one of the great stories that I've heard of Terry Higgins was when he was at Pride in 1980. He was dressed head to toe in leather and on the Heaven float at the time. He witnessed a police officer beating up a drag queen, and he took off his belt, jumped off of the float, hit the police officer, shouting, I'm allowed to swear on the podcast, how dare you bitches attack my friends. And we've immortalised this. So in the HIV movement, there's this thing called the Names Project, which is about creating quilts. So they were 3 foot by 6 foot, which is the material you'd put over a coffin, and they're to memorialise those who
I've
have
seen
died.
those.
There wasn't one for Terry, which I thought was remiss of us, and for our 40th anniversary, we commissioned one, and it was 8 different panels that told the different parts of his life. And to have at the top of it this beautiful pride flag with this leather through the middle of it that was designed by somebody who designed Madonna's leather for one of her music videos, which is pretty cool, and having this quote from Terry as he was there. So, you know, I think of him as, you know, he's somebody that kind of spurs me on to do these things. Sometimes it is my job to speak truth to power and to ask for things that maybe we're not entitled to get yet, but we just haven't convinced people. So I find Terry inspiring on that basis, but also to think, you know, how he lived clearly inspired what we're still doing now, in that it wasn't just that he was the first named person to die. It was that he was so special to his friends that losing Terry, they were like, we can't let anyone else go through this, and this man must be remembered. And I think that's a pretty amazing legacy to have. And I think that it feels an honour to work in his name, particularly because I know Rupert Whittaker, who was his then partner, and Martin Butler, who was his best friend, who did the lights in heaven while he was doing the music. And they were a real double act, apparently both from Wales. And, you know, knowing those people who knew him, who loved him, meeting Linda, who lived with him and used to have to pretend to be his wife when work colleagues came over for dinner, you know, how special that is. And one of the campaigns I got to work on was changing those rules on whether you can serve in the military if you're living with HIV. There's a wonderful guy called Ollie Brown who's living with HIV, was already in the military, and he was like, we've got to change these rules. And I think the fact that Terry was in the Navy and that Ollie was in the Navy, and we've that kind of line between his experience and where people are today, and he and the organisation set up in his name was part of that change that helped Ollie and other people say, we're no longer medically non-deployable. What a horrid term to put on people.
Yeah.
Is gone now because of that. Is a really special thing. And the more I learn about him, the more interesting he is. He set up in Parliament, when he worked recording what the MP said, there was a union at work, but the manager and the deputy manager, who was the manager's mistress, apparently, were the trade union reps. And they were like, maybe the workers should be the reps, not the managers.
Yeah.
And so he and his best friend at work, in fact, how he got his job was quite interesting. So this manager was the interviewing person, and they'd had this interview in the bar, how Parliament worked in the day, and the manager had suspected he was a homosexual. So went back to the office to find the youngest, prettiest woman, this wonderful woman called Vanessa, who's still with us and very inspiring, and brought her down. They both worked out what was happening, flirted outrageously. The manager convinced himself that he was clearly wrong and that Terry wasn't one of the wrong uns and you could employ him. They did. The two of them set up the union together. The manager was furious that they'd gone in with the votes to win the union thing and went to basically bully this woman that had become chair. And Terry went in and held him up by his neck and was like, you'll never come for us again, basically. And that woman, who was Terry's friend, was the first person to get a gay rights policy in Parliament. And so, you know, his legacy isn't just in what the Terrence Higgins Trust, that friendship network and the people who knew him were so inspired by him that they've all gone on to do really amazing things.
I mean, the name of the trust is the Terrence Higgins Trust. Did you sit around going, this Terry, it's a bit too geezery, a bit too straight?
I wasn't there in 1982. I wasn't born till 1984. I think it was, in the early days, it fluctuated between Terry and Terrence. And I think when it was the point of the name that was in that medical journal and the point that they had to make to the Company's House and the Charities Commission to get it officiated, that more officialdom happened. And it slightly set apart. We talk about Terry the man and Terrence Higgins Trust, the legacy, and it allows for both of those to exist in their own right, because none of us that have worked for Terrence Higgins Trust have ever met him by definition. And so
I'm very spiritual. Do you ever feel like he's with you?
Not quite, because I think while I think I'd have gotten very well with him, I don't think we were alike in that sense. But I think he does play this cultural role for us. And so when the new government were elected and they'd made a pledge that they would honour this commitment to end new cases by 2030, that they'd start the action plan in 100 days and et cetera, I got the first meeting with the new public health minister and I took in a portrait of Terry to put in his office, and him and his successor have got it there. And it was a reminder that you've made this pledge to do it and Terry's going to sit over you in all your work.
That's haunting. So that's there now, is it?
It's there in Whitehall, in the Department for Health, in the Public Health Minister's office.
Incredible.
And yeah, it's really incredible. And it's a print of the first posthumous commission in the National Portrait Gallery, because I convinced them that you couldn't. They never do posthumous commissions, but I was like, you can't record the AIDS epidemic then, because death was such a key part of it. And why wouldn't you mark Terry Higgins in doing that? And we changed the whole of how they approach it, and it is there.
Wow.
It's really amazing.
In terms of geopolitics, I'm not sure the Pope is politics actually, but where are we at with that? Because we have a new Pope now.
Look, the Catholic Church has never been our friends in doing this, and faith has always had a really important, powerful life in individuals' lives, and it's important that we work with those people to do it, and we can lean into the compassion of faith to try and make sure that things are better for people, but the formal power of faith has often been against us in this thing. And obviously the Catholic Church has played a big role in preventing the use of condoms and using faith to make sure that LGBT lives are either incriminated in some way or deeply discouraged. And it was so nice to have a that even with the babyest steps took some progress, and the sense that that's going back is obviously very worrying. The bit at the moment that is much more alarming is the actions of the US president. 222,000 people a day before he was elected were reliant on American paid for or provided drugs across Africa. 222,000 people a day were on life-saving HIV treatment, and he has cut all of it for 90 days. Was the initial decision, of which that got reversed a little by the courts. They're now making, looks like a 40% cut to that budget. 140,000 children will needlessly get HIV now in this year and next because of these changes. It's devastating. And what we're finding and what we're hearing from people on the ground is that they're starting to share their meds or take half their tablets. And what it will eventually lead to is resistant forms of the virus, because people, if you don't take your medication properly, the virus can beat the medication and can mutate. So we could end up with a worst case, because America, who has made an amazing commitment from George Bush Jr. onwards to fund 75% of the global AIDS response, while other countries are doing their different bits, have pulled back from that in a big way, and more people will not only have HIV, but more people will die of AIDS globally because of that decision. And I feel very lucky that we live in a country where the US president took down information on American websites about HIV. Our Prime Minister stepped up and did a HIV test, and has funded £27 million worth of testing across our A&Es to make sure people know their status.
Yeah, thank you so much for being part of Testing Week.
Not at all, it's really important to do it. Okay, here we go.
Here we go, let's do it.
And it's just press here, is it?
Yeah, just press there. There's a little spring in it, so you get a little shock. It doesn't hurt.
Shock.
You were so brave.
We should be thankful that we're not in the States, but when they get a cold, when they sneeze, the world gets a cold, and we're feeling that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really powerful idiom, considering we're talking about viruses.
Yeah.
It's hard, that, isn't it? Because that obviously is so great, and then you look at other things that the government do, and there's a lot of... I just think sometimes it is important that we do look at small wins.
Do you think it's to some extent reversible with the next president, if that president is well, I mean, even a Republican potentially, but is a non-Trumper?
Policies are not fixed. There's always an opportunity to change the policy. And his 90-day ban got overturned by the court, so his full cut is going to be a 40% cut. There's always room to manoeuvre, and we have some very amazing friends. The wonderful Elton John continues to use his position and power to advocate on the not just national stage but globally, and we all hope that he's the kind of person that one day Trump will answer the phone to him and it will make a difference. There are some amazing Republicans on the Hill that support this programme, have seen the benefit, see the soft power for America on being a good neighbour and being generous in the world. So policies aren't fixed, and thankfully, presidents are term limited, and their terms are fixed. So I'm an optimist constantly about our ability to win these fights and win these arguments, but it is clearly a very dangerous time for people at the moment. And what you can't reverse is those new people who acquire HIV.
Yeah, of course.
Because there is no vaccine and there is no cure. So those people will live with HIV for longer. They will have those treatment costs for life, and particularly if you're born with HIV, because the most preventable HIV acquisition is in a newborn baby. It's so easy. You just put the mother on meds and they won't pass on the virus to their baby.
I saw an article about Grindr and how you're trying to campaign to get rid of "Are you clean" as a phrase, right? That people say often on there. How's that going?
We've been trying to destigmatise dating with HIV for most of those 43 years, and sometimes it feels you make great strides, and sometimes it feels
I've got to be
haven't.
honest, I didn't realise that was about HIV until I saw your article. I thought it meant, like, have you
had a
douched?
shower?
No, I thought it meant, have you
This is-
douched? Are you ready to go? Like,
Right.
It's quite. There's a real generational divide on this, and for some people, maybe that's what it clearly does mean to people. It was interesting who got that as a reply, but I think it has been consistently and persistently used to ask, basically, are you living with HIV or have you got an STI?
Right.
Of course, if you're living with HIV, it suggests that you are somehow dirty. If you have a virus, it's just a virus.
Because the opposite of clean, of course,
Exactly.
is not clean.
It's that sense. But it also, it's shaming of the fact that you might get an STI of any kind. Like, I've had one, and the thing I did wasn't that shameful. It was really enjoyable. Thank you very much. And
Just a one STI?
well,
Gosh, I think I have one every other.
sure, but this is the thing: there's no shame in it. You
No,
know,
I don't
if
have
you're
any
going to drive
shame.
a car, you're going to get a parking charge occasionally, right?
I
You know,
do
like
think-
that's the.
I don't think there is as much shame about that in the queer community now, or at least I don't feel it. Or maybe it's because I don't have any shame that if someone tried to throw it at me, I just throw it straight back.
I think there's a bit of that, but clearly there is something on the apps.
Yeah.
About people and the idea that somehow if you ask them, are you clean, they're gonna be like, oh no, I've got chlamydia, of course we should have sex. They're like, if you knew you had chlamydia, you probably wouldn't be having sex, you'd be trying to get an appointment
Well,
in
it
the clinic,
depends.
which is really, really difficult.
Well, I guess if they told me and they were really hot, it would be my choice if I wanted to
Sure.
catch it from them or not.
Sure, that is your choice, and that's that they're the exchanges which have led to every STI going forward. So
Yeah, I do have a question there though, because I think when I've been asked by guys, I have been asked, "Are you clean?" or yeah, I think I have, but after I've had sex with them normally,
right, okay.
which I think I found that offensive, even though
Sure.
I
Well,
might.
they're definitely not asking, have you douched at that point, are they?
No,
It's too late.
So yes, I have had that question, and I always find that really offensive because, and I'm telling you this purely to just get your opinion. I think I find that offensive because I don't think their sexual health is my responsibility. That's not entirely true, but at that point, if we've already had sex, why are you putting me in a position?
Well, it's your risk tolerance, isn't it?
I
Like,
don't know,
you
yeah,
make
I
those
can't
choices
figure
about what
out
you're going to do.
where the
But
shame is coming from there, but it has triggered me a few times when people have said that because
Well-
I think they're sort of, I'm like, why are you not looking after your sexual health? Why is that responsibility being put on me suddenly?
and part of the problem, and one of the reasons why PrEP is so effective, is because it's not impacted by alcohol, drugs, or horniness, basically. And all
Yeah.
of those slightly confuse our brains. And there's times in which you thought, he's so hot, there's not a condom, I'm going ahead anyway, basically, regardless of the risk. Again, all of us have done it at some point or another. But the thing about PrEP is it means you can take a daily pill and you've taken charge of that. And that
Yeah.
can be,
And that
you
is
don't
the
have
thing,
to worry
it's
about
taking
HIV
control of
in the
your
sex
own
that you're having. Exactly.
body, yeah.
And that's why it's so important to fight the stigma, because what we're seeing is so many gay men who are living with this stigma that are then turning to drugs, alcohol, and crucially to chemsex, and are having such terrible outcomes because of it. Because the drugs that they go into thinking they're going to have the best sex they're ever going to have are the most addictive drugs, and they end up ruining their lives in other ways.
That's an interesting point, and I think without like going too far down a chemsex path, some of that I don't know if it is just necessarily that they feel like that's pleasure, but there's something I feel in the queer community where you are so used to being in the closet that going back into the closet by doing something that would be socially unacceptable feels sort of familiar.
Interesting. I've not heard that before. I've heard it more the other way around, of like, the only time I can have the sex I want to have is when these other noises in my brain, whether it's about HIV or STIs or parental expectations or an ex-boyfriend or whatever it might be, body morphia, all that stuff, they just get put out the way by the
Right.
drugs. I think that's...
Turning the volume down of everything else. It's crazy. I mean, how do we solve that?
Well, it'd be good to have a plan for a start. So one of the things I've been asking the new government is for them, basically for the minister to get a briefing on chemsex. And it's taken nearly 8 months for somebody to write it, because it isn't actually anyone's responsibility in the department. It falls between every stool. So we've got, I think, 3 people a week are dying of chemsex-related deaths, and an ambulance going out every single day about it. So, there's this kind of quiet epidemic happening with it, and it's everyone else's responsibility, it seems. And we're trying to bring together all the right people to say, we can't just let this carry on, and there's stuff that can be done about it. And I think, but you need a really important partner, and the NHS and the government have got to step up on it.
Sorry, go on. I was just going to bring up the gonorrhea news, which is amazing. Thanks to the work of Terrence Higgins Trust, gonorrhea is getting a vaccine in the UK, in England. What does that mean? And is that a good thing? I haven't really processed that yet. I saw it everywhere and thought, great, but I haven't thought about it.
So clever scientists developed the vaccine. It's for other things, but it's found to be highly effective with gonorrhea and could prevent 40%
So it's the
of
Ozempic
cases.
of the sexual health world. It was originally created for something else.
Originally created for something else, but and so it's out there. So we didn't do the clever stuff. What we've done is convince the government to fund it. And so from the 1st of September, basically across the country, when you go to your sexual health clinic, you'll be offered a gonorrhea vaccine if you're a gay man or a man of sex with men, or you've had a bacterial STI in the last 2 years.
Do they jab it in your bum like they do with the gonorrhea treatment?
I don't think so, but I don't know how. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know how they administer it. But this is adding to our toolkit on sexual health. So the previous thing that we won was the government funding the Mpox vaccine. So that is now available and rolled out across the country. So you should be able to ask for your Mpox vaccine and get it. There's hepatitis vaccines out there, and what's coming down the track soon is a thing called DoxyPep, which is a version of doxycycline that you take. Some people will take it privately or will appeal to the clinic to do it, but it's going to be under all the right regulations soon.
Okay,
and that is very successful at preventing chlamydia and syphilis.
That's like a morning after pill, Dan, for STIs. If you have sex and you're worried you might have got something, you can take that, which blasts it, basically, with antibiotics for a couple of days. I think I've got that right.
That's spot on.
How does that feel for you, listening to all of that? Because I know from other straight people, not necessarily you, but I want you to just speak freely, that, there's that opinion of well, just stop having sex. Just stop being so slutty. Do you have any of that, old processing? Because obviously we've talked so much about this stuff, but have you got any of that in your head still?
No, but I don't really understand how, I've never had sex without a condom. Unless it's been pre-arranged, do you know what I mean? In a relationship or whatever. And I just never would.
Yeah.
And that's in part, I guess, from less about, obviously I'm straight, less about HIV, although I realise that could happen. And I would be concerned about that, but more about somebody getting pregnant and me and me not having a say in that potentially and ending up with a child that I don't want. That's my main concern. And especially with someone, and I don't want to be misogynistic, but especially with someone I don't know. So to answer your question, it's
mind blowing.
It's just an alien world.
Yeah,
to me,
because you hear people say things there shouldn't be PrEP, there shouldn't be a gonorrhea vaccine. These people need to stop. It's just going to encourage people to have more sex. I could not be having any more sex if I tried. This isn't going to give me more sex, but it's going to protect me and arm me from more danger. So that has to be a good thing. And also
all of us are here because of sex. Literally every single one of us are here because of sex. And the few people that were born through IVF, they've done a lot of sex to try first before they got the IVF, right? Let's face it. The NHS won't give it to you unless you've tried a lot. And you're not parting with that much cash unless you've tried. So we're all here because of sex. That is absolutely key, and we need to just. It's not a shameful thing to engage in sex. You can decide to do it on whatever your terms are, as long as they're consensual, in a whole variety of different ways. One of the reasons why we're seeing STI rates going up, particularly in people over 50, is that essentially we've trained gay men to use condoms to stop HIV and straight people to use condoms to stop pregnancy. And so if you're postmenopausal, you don't need to. The logic is you don't need to use a condom, therefore. So in divorcees and those people are kind of going back round on the dating scene again, they're picking up STIs because they were previously using condoms if they weren't in a stable relationship.
Sure. How do people help the Terrence Higgins Trust?
There's lots of ways that people can help the Terrence Higgins Trust. So if you work for a great company that supports these things, book one of our Positive Voices speakers. We have the most amazing cadre of people living with HIV who tell their personal experience to make it happen. If you're sporty, not me, if you're sporty, you can run a marathon or a half or whatever for us and raise some money along the way. It's really important to have people out there doing those things and raising that. If you go to the theatre, you can join one of our bucket shakes after many of the theatre productions, not only in London but around the country, to make it happen. If you're able to set up a direct debit, £10 a month can make an absolute massive difference to the work we do, or whatever you can afford. And all of that goes to doing this work and making sure that we can be there. And as the government has pulled away from doing lots of this stuff over a long period of time, we've had to step up and make that happen. So generous supporters fund THT, and it means that we can do that work. But there's more work than I've got money to do currently, and the generous support of our supporters will go a long way. So whether you're baking a cake, running, getting your company to order, booking a speaker, or whether you're setting up a direct debit, all of that goes to this epic goal of ending new cases by 2030, being the first country to stop the onward transmission of HIV, and being the first virus where we stop the onward transmission without a vaccine, without a cure. And if that's not something to get excited about, I don't know what is.
I laugh because James hates any reference to marathons.
No, I don't.
Because I do
Not
them.
when they're raising money for the Terrence Higgins Trust. I think I've said this to you before, but I think the THT was the first sort of interaction I had in a good. I remember just walking into my local gay bar as a 17-year-old, so underage, and there being condoms in the bathroom that had the logo on it, and so yeah, I mean, in some respects, I do think I wouldn't be as healthy as I am if it wasn't for THT. Definitely, it's a hugely important charity in the UK. So amazing.
Well, it's pretty much our first service. They're called rubber stuffers. So people would meet in bars, get together, 2 condoms, 2 lubes, put them in a little pack, and leave them about for people. And that we've been doing for 40 odd years. So people have got easy access to condoms and lube.
Now?
Still doing it now.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
I love that. And actually, just before we go, what can we do for the non-gays?
Well, anyone can get HIV. It's not just a thing that gay men experience. It's a thing that you experience when you have sex, basically. So it is something that people who are straight can acquire. And those that are straight and living with HIV often feel that they're the untold part of the story. So Dan's part of the podcast is important as James's part of the podcast for this crucial message. And often the women living with HIV are leading the way on fighting the stigma and making sure people know and can go forward and just are empowered that if they do get a positive diagnosis, they're not on their own. There's lots of women and straight people living with HIV across the UK and across the country. We have peer support groups for heterosexual groups as well as for gay men, bi men. We've got a trans and non-binary group. Viruses are for everyone, is the truth. And we want to make sure we break down that stigma. It's not for a community. It's something that anyone can experience. And we've got to make sure we end this epidemic, not for one community, but for everyone who's affected by HIV. And that means finding the 5,150 people who are living with undiagnosed HIV and helping the 12,000 people who are diagnosed but don't take their medication. And we're here for all of them.
How do you find those numbers, I guess?
The latter is because the clinics have got a list of people who haven't been for more than 15 months.
Right.
And we've got to do the work to chase them down. And the former is a combination of recent diagnosis and kind of population trends. And then they'll go and do spot checks in hospitals to go and check every bit of blood that's been donated and find out what the prevalence in that area is.
Interesting.
Diagnosed or not.
All right. On that note,
Well,
Richard,
thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for coming in.
And happy birthday, Terry Higgins.
Yeah.
Happy birthday,
How
Terry.
should we celebrate, Terry? What should we do?
So we're asking people to raise a glass for Terry. So if you've got a kind of pride event that's happening already, have a moment at it, like you would at a wedding, where you kind of think about the people who are not with us.
I mean, I want to go and do something
similar.
really I want to whip a cop.
Don't whip a cop.
Okay, don't do
you
that.
could bake a cake or something.
Okay, I'll
for
bake a
him.
cake.
Bake
Yeah.
a birthday cake and sell it to your friends and do it as a fundraiser.
Nice. Thanks for listening today. We'll see you very soon. Don't forget to check out the links in our episode description, and you can also donate to us on our Patreon. But we'd rather you donate to THT today because Richard's still sat here.
Yeah. Back to Patreon chat next week.